Hello, and thank you for joining us for the next episode of the Data Monetization webinar series. This episode will examine manufacturing, industrial, and business-to-business markets. This is the third episode in a six-part series, which will take place every other Thursday through mid-December. A recording of the webinar and the slides will be made available to all registrants. Feel free to enter any questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom menu. We invite you to follow us on LinkedIn to see news about other upcoming webinars. And with that, I'll turn things over to our moderator.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone to our next installment on our data monetization series. As always, we've got a really great panel lined up today. We've got our couple of return speakers today, which Liz Fortier, who is a privacy officer at LivaNova, which is a medical device company. But previously to that, Liz spent a number of years working for some high-tech software companies as data privacy officer. So Liz comes to us with a deep background in legal aspects. And Liz's role today is to answer questions and add some color commentary. We will be doing a separate webinar and at the end of this series. It's not scheduled yet. That'll just be dealing with legal issues. Our main thrust today is to talk about the technology and what's going on in industry. And our next speaker introduction is for Manjeet Rege. Manjeet is director of the Center of Applied Artificial Intelligence. He's a professor also at the University of St. Thomas. And Manjeet is got a PhD in computer science, has his own podcast, which is all things digital. You might want to dial into that, and I want to welcome Manjeet back. Manjeet will be our first speaker today. Next up, we've got Scott Branum, and Scott is the digital solutions manager at his company, which is Evoqua Water Systems, and I think, or Water Technologies, excuse me, Scott. And so Scott, we're lucky to have him today because Scott's actually deploying digital solutions and doing digital solution transformations in, a heavily industrial sector, water technologies. So we're going to get some real practical advice today and practical guidance from Scott. Scott, I believe, got his degree from Auburn University. And then also we've got Scott Nelson today, who's the Chief Digital Officer at Tamarack. And Scott is leading that company's efforts to expand its impact on industry through innovation and new system level products and design thinking, and particularly new digital technologies. So Scott is also former Chief Technology Officer at Digi International and some other corporations, been in the semiconductor industry as well. So Scott brings a really wide background, diverse background with us today, and some advanced thinking on the topics at hand. So if we go to our next slide there and just talk a little bit about, so today we're really going to just kind of talk a little bit about using data in, in the industrial sector, manufacturing sector. We're going to talk a little bit about what companies do, to actually monetize data, how they're transforming their businesses. And to get kicked off, we'll just go to Manjeet. And Manjeet, you want to start us off, please?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. So I'll start off with, talking about why do companies want to monetize data to transform the business model. So for example, one could be in medical devices manufacturer, and then you can pivot that into offering health services and solutions. So in doing that, you may be creating a supplemental revenue stream or introducing a new line of business. If you look at companies such as Amazon, Netflix, Disney, they monetize data by gaining a close understanding of their customers. So with this, they can offer highly relevant products and services and kind of delight their target audience at every touch point and create a competitive differentiation in the market. Um, with monetization, it also helps in strengthening partnerships. Buying and selling of data takes place in a data marketplace. So if you're a data owner, you can set data prices and consumers can choose from who they wish to buy data. So it improves data sharing and collaboration between internal and external stakeholders. When you monetize your data, you're able to figure out the understanding of the customers, and you can now use these insights into how best to improve your products and services. So this improves the overall customer journey and makes the customer stick around by your product. I want to talk about data as a key enabler for industrial digital transformation. Now, more than ever, industrial manufacturing companies face the challenge of remaining globally competitive. Now, let's take a step back and look at how we got to this moment. Manufacturing historically focused on building a product and then selling it. There was usually a service attached, but the bulk of the revenue came from selling the product itself. The service component was a cost center, just to make sure that the products kept running. But over time, manufacturing began facing margin pressure from cheaper competitors in a globalized marketplace. Now, product margins became razor thin, whereas services contributed more and more to the bottom line. Suddenly, services became a positive component that drove revenue. So that's where you began to have connected products with IoT, that delivers data that can be used to create a whole new portfolio of services that can be delivered to customers. And more importantly, turn those services into new revenue streams. So data is a key building block of a successful digital transformation strategy, as it is a vital enabler to either optimize efficiency of manufacturers' value chains or to develop a new data-driven business models. And many manufacturers are trying to find the roadmap to data monetization success. This is a survey. So in 2019, IDC conducted a survey of global enterprises to find out what business models they were using for their IoT projects. Um, the first thing you will notice is that implementation of IoT rose across the board from 2018 to 2019, which makes sense given the overall trends in business as well as in IoT. But what's interesting is that most companies are focused on the internal benefits of IoT. That means using the flood of customer data to improve existing processes, products, and relationships. So these strategies are synergistic because they help companies learn from their customers and turn those learnings into best practices. I want to now talk about you know industrial manufacturers and how they can monetize data in the different aspects. So, for example, in R&D engineering, in order to optimize product design, a data-centric approach is required. Engineering teams should have access to data from a broad spectrum of sources. Sales and marketing data provide engineers with insights into customer needs and preferences that ultimately translate into increased revenue when their products reach the market and generate sales. Service and support data help teams to design for both reliability and serviceability, leading to reduced breakdowns and faster maintenance. So today, most data sets reside in siloed applications. Um, CRM for sales and marketing, SRM for suppliers, ERP for end-to-end manufacturing data. These data silos are a significant barrier in leveraging the power of analytics to enhance important facets of R&D and engineering. This is evident from a recent report published wherein only 8% analytics usage was reported for R&D function. So an IT architecture with data at its core that integrates these applications via cloud-based product data management or product lifecycle management can boost engineering efficiency. Shop floor operations. The shop floor is a prime example of how large amounts of data are being captured and stored, but not adequately monetized. Information technology and operations technology integration can change that, which we commonly refer to as IT and OT integration. Very often, data is useful for identifying weak points in production in order to speed up throughput or to avoid waste production. By applying data analytics solutions, relations very often become clear, which help to identify such weak points. A very simple example is the analysis of data that you're generating in production. So this could reveal that a certain machine is producing a significantly above average share of defective or misassembled products only on certain days when operated by a particular employee. So this allows for appropriate measures to be taken, which in this case could be more training for this particular employee. So such a simple analysis of existing data can help to increase efficiency on the shop floor, um, and overall increase the throughput. Service and support. Technologies such as IoT, augmented reality, mobile devices, and wearables like smart glasses enable service technicians to increase their efficiency. For example, by leveraging these technologies, service technicians can access instructions for a complex for a complex production machine by wearing smart glasses, which display service instructions on them. So they are actually just reading through the glasses. Now, this also allows them to carry out maintenance tasks hands-free. In addition, giving field service workers remote access to relevant data from various data silos, which I referred to on the earlier slide, can, by using augmented reality, can speed up repair times and reduce service costs. Unscheduled machine downtime at a customer site um, results in costly service calls to OEMs. So the goal should be to prevent unplanned downtime in order to avoid expensive ad hoc service and maintenance tasks at the customer site. Different predictive maintenance ideas by leveraging predictive analytics and IoT can help to better plan service tasks, reduce associated costs, and subsequently increase the efficiency and of service and support. So for most companies, all of these possibilities are within reach now with data that is already captured. So it is not the data, it's what you do with it that matters. With that, I'll hand it over to our next speaker, that is Scott Branum. Over to you, Scott.
Manjeet, and here we go with Scott Branum.
Thank you. Yes, I'm the Digital Solutions Manager for Evoqua Water Technologies, and most of you have probably not heard of Evoqua. But what we do is we treat water for various uses. It can be for manufacturing, for research, for hospitals, and anything in between. Being in the water industry for 25 years, it is absolutely amazing to see everything that is used, the water is used in, manufacturing, and just every product, t-shirts, it's used everywhere. But the reason that I share kind of Evoqua and our Evoqua story, I think it's very, goes to the heart of where some of this discussion is that Evoqua historically been a 100-year company, and we have always been a products and services company. We sell products with a service tail as much as possible, but a very, very much a traditional product company. We have been trying to transition over the last 7 years to become more data centric, leveraging data internally, and then also thinking about how we're going to leverage data as services in the future. Next slide. So there's 4 primary considerations when we think about monetizing data. And from an industrial service company, there's really 4 things that we're always looking to impact. At the end of the day, they all tie back into either increasing revenue through new sales or reducing costs through increased efficiencies. But we believe that data and data insights and analytics, it increases the customer intimacy and the value that we provide to our customer. So it's about changing the conversation that we have with our customers relative to the products of ours that they use. Traditionally, we would sell a product, and then maybe at some point in time in the future, we would show up, and hopefully the same person that had bought the equipment was still there. And we would engage and say, hey, we just wanted to stop by. We sold you a system a few years ago. We just want to check in and see how it's going. What data allows us to do is to continuously maintain an umbilical cord to that system, providing additional value and ongoing services to that customer. It really changes the conversation. It also, the traditional product sales model is that I want to sell you a product at the highest price, and you want to buy a product that you find value in at the lowest price. And we're always just working to find something in between. Pricing and price models and even service models were built with one side of that table in mind. At Evoqua, the traditional service company, we're always looking to manage risk as much as possible, which is often not in the best interest of the customer. So what data allows to do is drive increased transparency between the vendor and the customer. It allows us to share risk because data and insights allow us to manage risk better than we've ever managed it before, reducing our costs and then being able to pass some of those savings on to the customer. And it creates a much more transparent and partnership environment. Within a service department, our traditional model is we either waited for the customer to call us, tell us something was broken and then needed help. We would roll a truck in our service group, who was really good. But as soon as that technician got in the truck and went to the customer site, we're generating a pretty expensive expense at that time. And then we would do our work, and then the customer would pay us in kind for it. So in order for us to generate revenue, we were always having to generate an expense. And what data is allowing us to do is break that expense to revenue paradigm. With data and data services, yes, they have costs, but the costs continue to go down, and proportionally, they're very, very cheap, especially as you drive automation into it. And what it allows us to do is to generate ongoing revenue without the associated costs with it. So it's a very good model. And then, of course, the one that Manjeet was just talking to, it improves our service efficiencies. We're not waiting for things to break. We get out of the break fix model, and we get into much more proactive type service models. Next slide. So these next 4 slides, or these 4 boxes, will kind of walk us through that transition that we're making as a company. And I've chosen the wastewater treatment system at a municipality as a proxy for this conversation. And you can see on the left that in our traditional products centric model, which we're still breaking from, we have 5 different groups that would sell different products and services into the same customer, and often talking to the same end user. So Each one of these 5 groups had different value propositions. They had different financial objectives. Sometimes they worked against each other. And for the customer, it's a very fragmented process. And the value, once again, is much more of what is your price versus what is the ongoing value that you're going to provide. Next. So what we've begun to do, we've been doing this over the last 7 years, as we begin to mature in our data analytics effort, is that what we realize is that the equipment we provide and the service that we provide are becoming more and more commoditized every day. But the data that we're generating is truly unique, and it allows us to really differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. So we believe that the equipment and the services that we provide will be commodities without a data-enabled strategy. So our key strategic effort now is data collection and analysis, an analytics leader for the water industry. So we're working toward, we're always going to have products, we're always going to have services, but instead of those being our leading edge, we want to become much more of a data-centric company, providing data values that then have equipment-supported recommendations. Next. So, as we've transitioned more into this, what we call our 2.0 capabilities, we're leveraging data capabilities into our customer processes. So as we've taken analytics and we've made our systems better, we understand how they perform, we understand what the data tells us. We've been able to gain unique insights, make creative development. That now, since we understand our processes and systems that go into the customer's location so much better, we're now able to offer that as a direct service to our customers, saying, yes, we understand how your system works at the very level, but because we sell products into all portions of your total system, that we actually have system solution-based services that are driven by data analytics. Next one. And so finally, long-term, the vision is that we go to a customer and say, we want to manage your data because we have the modules, we have the understanding, we have the data analytics, we have the AI that will help you optimize, run your systems more efficiently. And when there's an opportunity and the data supports an equipment upgrade, new equipment installation, whatever it might be, we have a full products and services line behind here that we can provide. We can do those services for you, but all will have data supported ROI associated with it. So you can see that transition from a product solution to now a data-centric solution. This doesn't happen overnight, and it has to be done very surgically. Next. This is a picture of a system that we sell into hospitals, into central sterile groups. And this is a new digital system that we've developed called Vantage SPD. And what the value proposition is that there's been new regulations that have come out for these particular parts of the hospital that are very stringent and they're very difficult to show that you're meeting. So we built a system that collects all the data analytics, and sensors and data points that are tied directly to meeting and validating that the customer is meeting that regulation. So in this particular instance, we went away from selling a product, because we don't sell it. We actually use this as a water as a service. But what we've done is we've tied it to business outcomes. We've given a shared risk model. We've got service level agreements tied to uptime and availability. We understand the compliance and the regulatory considerations, and the customer understands how we help them meet that. And then also reliability. This is one part of the hospital that can never be down because it supports their surgical centers, which are the primary source of revenue for the hospital. But more importantly, is we would typically sell equipment. We would then sell a service contract, which means that we would come out and service the system at some level of frequency. It could be monthly, it could be annually, it could be something, whatever the frequency was that we agreed upon. We've transitioned away with that because our data supported services allow us to go to service level agreements. And the contractual value, the profitability, and also the value to the customer is much higher in a service level agreement than it is in a service contract. And what this has allowed us to do is transition from, in the eyes of the customer, from being a vendor to much more of a business consultant. Next slide. This is our Water One SD system. This particular line of business has been around for 50 years. We recently introduced 5 years ago a digitally connected version of this service and transformed this particular business from a service model to a water as a service model. So in pre-2015, the way this service worked and the way it worked for almost 50 years was we would deploy these assets at a customer site. They had a certain lifespan. The customer had to monitor it. When a light turned red, they would have to call us. A service technician then would be scheduled to go out to the customer site. We would exchange the tank, put fresh ones in, and then we would send the customer a bill. So the customer had to actively be involved. We got disrupted because it was very hard to predict when service was needed, if at all. And then oftentimes the customer was stuck with a bill that maybe they didn't expect. Well, in 2015, 2018, we did sensorize the system. And so what we were able to see is when the unit needed service. We saw when the light turned red, and then we were able to take the customer out of them, allowing them to focus more on what they wanted to do in their day-to-day job instead of focusing on the water system. But in 2019, we even took it a step further. We added additional sensors, and then we added artificial intelligence to it. So now it predicts when it will need to be exchanged, and our prediction algorithms have gotten good enough that they're about 95 to 98% accurate. So we're able to see weeks in advance when a customer needs service. The customer no longer pays for the exchange, they pay for the water that they use. And because of that, their water usage is typically tied directly to the volume of business that they had. So they really enjoy that relationship as well. So we've increased our service efficiency. The customer's no longer worried about the exchange, and that's not what's important. What's important to the customer is that ongoing quality of water that they have available and that they use. Oh, before you go to the next slide, can you go back one? What was also really neat is when COVID-19 happened, because we saw a lot of these systems in the hospitals. Hospitals didn't want us on site. They didn't want us, anywhere near their facility. But they had to have water in order to, run their hospital and run these, services that were supporting COVID-19. What we were able to do is, because we have thousands of these installed now, is that we were actually able to see the status of each system every day. We were monitoring it. We were in contact with the hospitals and the frontline workers, letting them know that, hey, we are going to have to be on site on this day. They were able to take extra steps to allow us to get on site, and we're doing safety protocols at that point. But what we found is the value that we were able to create because of those data insights was not anticipated. I mean, nobody anticipated COVID-19, but it's very hard for me to imagine how hospitals who didn't have that type of digitally connected service, how they were able to function in a very continuous way. Next. So last slide here, we talked about, we covered all the things that are on the left. But I just put this slide on the right, and this is a very generic slide. But one of the things that people, and the mistake that I see businesses make, is that the idea of machine learning or algorithms or these advanced capabilities, they're very tempting, and everybody inherently understands the value of them. And so there becomes a focus on implementing something that maybe the business isn't ready to support. And as you start thinking about implementing your data and your digital journey, you have to make sure that you have the foundation blocks set up to be able, so that these advanced capabilities can work in the future. Because if you don't have data 1.0 at a high degree of implementation, the odds of data 3.0 working very well is probably very, very low. So each level is directly linked, and each level's ability to scale is dependent on the lower building blocks degree of implementation. So implementing this in a way that allows you to really do what you want to do, it takes a lot of thought, a lot of foresight, and having the right partners is critically important as well. But as you build up 1.0 and 2.0, your speed picks up, and the amount of value that you're able to provide increases proportionally as well. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Scott. That was excellent. Hey, I did have a question that came to mind as you were presenting. Actually, a couple of them. One is, so who do you use to do your machine learning and AI stuff? Is that internal resources or do you outsource that?
Yeah, that's a great question because we do have multiple machine learning and AI additional things that we're working on, much more complex use cases. And so we've been going through this idea or the discussion around build versus rent. Do we want to build up the internal resources to be able to do this, or do we want to partner with somebody that that can help us build this maturity? And where we have landed is that we do have a few internal resources, but we have used external resources or external companies and partners to help us because it allows us to scale much quicker. And then it also reduces our overall risk because the typical personal assets, data scientists and things like that, very, very expensive. They're very hard to find. And so that business continuity, as you start your business, starts depending upon these services more and more and more, both internally and externally, you got to make sure that they're sustainable. And then we chose the sustainability path today through a third-party partnership.
And then, so another thing is more of a comment, I guess, but I guess elicit a little reaction was that, as it occurred to me as your systems are getting more interconnected or they're feeding more data even between themselves or back to your servers. I mean, you sort of are building more of an ecosystem that's integrated together, which seems like a better value proposition than just individual pieces of equipment that might be mixed and matched with competitor equipment.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, as a product-centric company, we sold the same building blocks into the same applications over and over and over again, but we never looked at them as a solution or as a system, I should say. We looked at them as individual components, and each component more or less worked independently of the other components. And so what we're having to go back to our product managers and say is, look, you have to start thinking about these things working as systems and not products. Because the value is in the system, it's not in the individual application or the individual product.
Yep.
And so we're having to go back and redesign things because yes, can we build more solutions? Yeah, but they're not very elegant, and they often can be kind of arduous to put in and maintain. So we're definitely doing more system thinking at this point.
Very good. There is a question that came in, and I guess we'll take this and then we'll go to Scott Nelson. But so the question is does your company view shared risk from a portfolio risk model? Does it manage its overall composite risk of their customers as a single large portfolio? And how does the aggregation of that data feed into a portfolio risk management model?
Yeah, so we haven't really done a portfolio risk, but I have been putting together some webinars internally to start thinking about our connected system as a portfolio of products, but where we manage risk specifically with data is at the customer level by understanding where they're trying to manage risk and also where they're trying to manage cost. And then we build in data-driven transparency, usually in the form of a report or a dashboard or some level of engagement point that allows the customer to know that we are managing that risk properly. So our risk management is much more at the local level and at the systems level, but we are starting to drive that because we're now getting we now have enough critical mass in the amount of systems that we have connected. Before we didn't, but now it's starting to make a lot of sense to look at it as a portfolio, not just from an execution point of view, but from a financing point of view. And it's interesting. Scott Nelson and I have been talking about this very thing, which he even talked a little bit about in his presentation.
So I think
but
that.
The other one,
oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead, Scott.
Well, I was going to say the other one is that the water treatment system company looking to supply chain industry to design. Did we look to the supply chain? No, we did not look to the supply chain. What we did is we've developed a lot of internal algorithms ourselves, and the reason is because as I mentioned before, the equipment and the services. Well, when I say services, I mean manual service, is becoming more and more and more commoditized. So that trend will continue, if not accelerate here over the next 5 years. Where the value is going to come from is in the algorithms and the leveraging of data. And that's where the IP, future IP will be developed. And that's where I think just about every company is going to have to end up differentiating themselves.
Well, thank you very much. We'll have time hopefully for a couple more questions for you at the end here. I know I've got one saved up for you. With that, we'll transition over to Scott Nelson. Scott, you want to kick it off?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Scott and Manjeet, for setting this up very nicely. I'm going to talk about data monetization from a little bit higher level, a little design thinking, and a little bit of the how-to, following up on the great example that Evoqua sets for us, and you can kind of see how some of the things I'm going to talk about, they have already used. And my theme here is don't forget the users, and I'll explain that in a minute, because we're talking about industrial and B2B, and I have quite a bit of experience firsthand with some of these challenges. So Tamarack, on the next slide, Tamarack, I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Tamarack. The next slide, yeah, we go. Tamarack's a technology company that works in equipment finance. I love seeing risk questions. Bankers, there's a lot of bankers in equipment finance. They're finance companies. Risk is always, risk is at the top of our menu every day. So we can talk about that and follow up questions as needed. I have a lot to say about that. But our mantra today is access to capital provides access to data. That's what equipment finance is about. And pretty much all equipment today either is or can be connected. And then what we're bringing to the table is data protects capital. And we differentiate ourselves as a company by combining top talent from both equipment finance. Our company's 20 years old, and been in equipment finance for 20 years. And now myself and several others have added, coming from the operational side of the technology stack, the IoT business. And we're partnering with the key players, software and technology players, and on both the operational side and the equipment finance side. But I'm going to talk to you today about some things that I've seen working on both sides, and how those two things we think are going to be strongly connected going forward. So on the next slide, we'll start with, what is monetization? I mean, what's the problem we're going to solve here? Well, the first thing is, first thing you look at is, from a transaction point of view, it's revenue minus cost equals profit. It's selling a product or even selling a service, rolling a truck. And as Scott has just told us, that's the old way, right? That's not the new, that's not really the kind of monetization we're looking at with digital monetization. The next thing you can look at is, I'm going to meet a sustained need. I'm going to provide I'm going to serve a sustained need, and this can be anything from toilet paper to, in this world, it's cellular connectivity. Cellular connectivity is a commodity, right? And if we've watched, Scott and I have watched the cellular providers race to the bottom in terms of price, trying to keep our business. And that, that's a tough way to monetize, particularly when you've got a lot of capital to deploy your solution. Now, they find ways to do it, but this is something that you have to be aware of. Okay, and then the next thing is, what really matters is adoption. Adoption is the key to monetization in a connected world, and we're going to talk about why that is. But adoption is, one of the definitions of innovation, coming from Peter Drucker, is it's a change in behavior. He's got a famous quote talking about a change in behavior of farmers and manufacturers and teachers, and of course, for those of us in business, it's a change in economic behavior. And when you get adoption curves, you can get exponential monetization. And most everybody in the audience will be familiar with how that works, and apps and things on their phones. But this is the challenge that we are equally facing in the industrial and B2B space. So we're going to really talk about this innovation leadership that drives adoption, right? So if we go to the next slide, we start with innovation. This is my favorite. IDEO kind of created the innovation Venn. And you can see in the blue here, the innovation experience, the experience innovation. That's when you have a viable business providing a desirable product, using feasible technology. These are the three trends. And when you get rid of the three traits and you get those things together, that's when you drive innovation. But you got to be careful when you take on this challenge. The next slide. you can miss. And there's some great examples. It's always great to look at, learn by failures, but some great examples how you miss the sweet spot. And the first one is really nonprofit. My favorite was net zero. I was an early net zero adopter, and it was a great model. But it couldn't, it didn't make money. It wasn't a viable business proposition, and it went away. And there's a lot of examples like that. The next one, on the next side, you don't really have tech leverage, and we've seen a lot of this lately with the .com and the internet age. Blockbuster, great brands like Blockbuster and Kodak and Border Books that have all failed because they did not take advantage of the tech leverage that others were using. And then the last one is probably one of the most common, is what we call the tech push. This is when, hey, I can build something cool and it can make money. I know how to make money, but it really doesn't solve an important problem. Nest Revolve was a great example. Quirky Egg Minder is one of my favorite. I've never had an egg. I've never cracked an egg that's been rotten, and yet they built a product that would tell me if I had a rotten egg in the refrigerator. Kind of a classic example of solving a problem that doesn't really exist. But if you really focus on the center, that's where you can get this monetization. So the next, yeah, that's, so this is where monetization really happens, because this is where innovation happens. So we go to the next slide. We're going to talk about, three insights on digital monetization. So we focus specifically on digital and connected products. Okay. The first one is digital is an experience economy. Experience economy was first published by Pine and Gilmore in 1998, pre.com. And they were talking about the importance of understanding that you're not selling products anymore in this economy. And this trait just ramped exponentially once the internet hit. And a great example of it is what you see here. The iPhone came into the point and shoot market. The Sony has a great article in Wired magazine about they were building these point and shoot cameras. And they were constantly upgrading, the amount of memory, the picture density, the pixel density, the features, the zooms, the soft zooms. The iPhone comes out and it's got a relatively poorly performing camera, but it has the thing that everybody wanted, which is it could share pictures. And then apps like Instagram, and Snapchat come along, and in 5 years, the bottom just completely fell out of the product, the camera product market. And that was because they weren't paying attention to the experience that really mattered to their customers. So the thing about B2B, and this is something that people, I think those of us who've been in the market, Scott has talked and I have talked about it. There's no such thing as just B2B when you're in this type of economy. Everything is B2B to B2B to C. And your C is sometimes a consumer, but it's sometimes just a user, it's an operator, it's a patient. If you have a value proposition to the enterprise that says, hey, if you do these things, your enterprise will be more efficient. But if you don't design your experience to the user level so that it's easy for them to use and that they can be effective, then they won't adopt. And if they don't adopt, then the enterprise solution does not present, right? And this is a really important understanding as you're developing your products and developing your experiences. Adoption happens at the user level, at the end of the value chain. And if you do not get adoption there, you can sell a product, and we'll talk about a company that's doing this. You'll sell a product to an enterprise, but you may not, that enterprise may be disappointed in their results, not because your product doesn't work, but because you didn't focus on adoption, at the level you needed to. Okay, so the next constraint we're going to talk about is ownership is obsolete. I'm working in the equipment finance world now. We live this every day, right? But we also, as consumers, we know this. We have a generation that is, with Airbnb and Uber and Lyft. We have an entire generation that doesn't really think about ownership. And you get usage-based insurance, and now we're moving towards usage-based financing. It's one of the biggest trends in equipment finance. And if you look at this number, I found this stat: $1.8 trillion were invested in plants and equipment in 2019, and 50% of that was financed. And what you should take from that is 50% of the people spending that much money, they really didn't want to own that equipment. They needed it to serve their mission or their purpose, right? And so what they really wanted to buy was the experience. And depending upon their economic stability, they have the ability to do that. Um, and so I think this is something that has to be considered, as you monetize. If you're thinking about monetizing at that transaction level, and Scott talked about this, they've already moved past this very quick. They've moved well past this with Water One, and they have one of the key financial accomplishments of this understanding is Water One converts from a capital purchase to an OpEx purchase. And anybody who's run a P&L, knows how much we love OpEx costs, because then we pay when we make money, right? And it's a reduction of risk, because you're not really worried about ROI on a long-term scale. You're now worried about, can I make money on every conversion, every transaction? So it's a big deal. Okay, next slide, please. The last thing is, I was actually doing a paper for one of the journals in equipment finance on risk and COVID. And uncertainty forms the basis for a valid theory of profit. This is a quote from Frank H. Knight, and I lost my my citation, but this was published in 1921. So 1921, they're talking about what really makes profit, and the key to this understanding is actually risk. When you have a risk, you typically have a mathematical model. You have a statistical model that tells you about the risk. And once you have a mathematical model of risk, what Knight said was, perfect competition will remove all risk, and they will figure out how to balance the risk with their gains, and essentially profit will disappear. And you can see this in a lot of places, and obviously the place you see this most clearly is in casinos and gambling, where they have quantitative risk. But if in this space, if you're really going to profit, if you're really going to give a value proposition to a customer that they haven't seen before, or that they really highly value, you embrace the uncertainty to profit. You profit from knowing how to deal with uncertainty. Scott made a perfect example, right? They did not build Water One with its remote capabilities and its on-demand capabilities to deal with COVID-19. But when COVID-19 hit, that uncertainty hit, they were prepared. Both they and their customers were then prepared to be able to deal with it without interruption. You can just imagine the challenges that these hospitals would have if they for other reasons, for reasons of uncertainty or policy, they were not allowed to maintain these water systems. Basically, their entire line goes down, their factory goes down. And so this is a great example of not really managing risk, but managing uncertainty. The other thing that's important to understand about data is data converts uncertainty to risk. If you watch an uncertain situation happen long enough, you can reduce it to risk by understanding it statistically. And once it's a risk, it can be managed. The trick here is be first, right? So embrace that uncertainty, start gathering data, start understanding that uncertainty, and then you can monetize that uncertainty by managing the risk. And this is something that we are doing across portfolios and everything in equipment finance. So let's look at some examples of who's learning fast here. Local company 75F, they have done a great job of converting what the traditional HVAC world, and I grew up at Honeywell, they're using data and AI to essentially remove the uncertainty of the structure of the building. For those who've ever installed an HVAC system, the structure of the space you're trying to heat or cool is a factor that has to be managed. And then you put in the orientation of the building, the number of windows, and the solar load, and everything can go out the window. These systems manage all of that. They learn about where the building is, how the building performs. They learn about the heat sources, both external and internal, i.e. users or clients or customers, and they save money. And they've been doing just a great job for about 5-6 years now using data. They started, it's a software engineer, started this quote unquote hardware company with the idea that I'm going to manage these uncertainties, and I'm going to make it easy. And I'm going to do everything based on an experience, right, which is just a comfort experience. Progressive has done this really well with the snapshot. Their users of the snapshot get the experience of reduced costs by by getting credit for the way they drive, and it helps them drive safer once they know that somebody's watching. And in return, Progressive gets massive amounts of data that previously they had to wait for all the accidents to happen in order to get the data that they can use to monetize their insurance. Now they get data constantly that tells them about how people drive and where they drive, and how to better run their business with their own data. So it's a great example of solving for both the enterprise and the end user. Cradlepoint, Ericsson. Cradlepoint was a company I competed with when I was at Digi, and just a typo clarification. I was a chief product officer at Digi, not chief technology officer. But as a product officer, we were watching all of the competitors very closely. Cradlepoint was one of the first to convert from selling a business continuity cellular product to selling business continuity as a cloud service. And then they eventually got rid of the hardware altogether, and you basically, like Water One, you just bought business continuity as an annual experience, and the hardware essentially went away from the transaction. It's a great example, and they've been very, very successful in doing this, competing with big companies. And then Ericsson recently bought them to, as an example of the success, helping companies with business continuity and networking. And I have Evoqua here, of course. They're one of my favorite examples of the conversion from selling a product to selling an experience. And in this case, it's the clean water experience. We heard about that from Scott. A great example of learning quickly on how these things are changing. And then let's look at the other side of the coin. Who's struggling a bit. Particle is a company that has, I think they're up to like 71 million they've received in venture capital funding. They actually started here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, as a company called Spark. They sell connectivity kits to product developers and companies that are building new products that come with a cloud experience to help make it easier to get to that cloud and that connected product experience. They've been very successful from a marketing and brand point of view, with an investment point of view. It's not clear yet that they've converted to, am I creating an ongoing adoption experience that's gonna make my company monetize that adoption. And one of the challenges, I think, is that they're at the front end of the value chain. They're doing development, and they're doing a very good job there. But it's not clear that they've designed a business model that monetizes the actual adoption of the products into which their products go beyond the hardware. Samsara is a well-known company, even more venture capital money there, that has been founded by I think it was former Cisco executives. Very good at understanding how to build connected products and how to sell them, and they sell them for logistics and monitoring. But I think they come from a background of selling at the enterprise level. I went out and looked at an electronic log database that had basically people talking about Samsara and other products in terms of their experience. And what was interesting is there were far more negatives than there were positives when you opened up the dialogue to the people driving the trucks and to small fleet owners. And one of the things that was most common that we saw in the equipment finance world when COVID hit, one of the first things all the lessors did is they looked at helping companies through the turmoil with deferments. And we actually launched a product that helped people do mass deferment calculations across contracts to basically help their customers, get across this chasm of uncertainty. And one of the biggest, Samsara being a SaaS company, not being a finance company, but being a SaaS company, they focused on the contracts, and many customers complained that they couldn't get, they lost the ability to make money, but they didn't have anywhere to go in terms of basically getting to that CapEx model where I pay when I use, right? Which is a really, really powerful model. GE Digital is probably the big one on here in terms of brand. The Wall Street Journal did an extensive article on the challenges GE Digital have. My summary of GE Digital, because I watched and lived through this, they created a tremendous amount of marketing and a tremendous amount of perception of software, and they hired a lot of software people, and they built a big system called Predix. but I never understood what they were selling, and they seemed to be selling some of the things that they had learned themselves, and now they were going to sell that to everybody else. But their customers were people who buy trains and engines and things, and they don't buy the software. They buy the power of these products. And I think GE confused either themselves or their customers or both, and they were not able to monetize on the digital side the way they were able to monetize on the product side before, and they're still working on it. That's why they're all of these companies are still working on this, but where they've had success today is questionable. And Sierra is another Digi competitor, but they also were a Digi supplier. We bought a lot of modules from them. They sell a lot of things into the connected space. I wouldn't be surprised if Scott and Evoqua had Sierra modules and maybe even Sierra routers in some of their products. They could. Sierra then went out and bought a carrier, basically an MVNO carrier, a mobile virtual network operator. And so now they're selling you SIM cards, they're selling you airtime. And then all of this is managed out of a cloud database where they have data flowing through, but they're not really monetizing the data other than the movement of the data. They're not doing analysis, for you or providing things. And I think they too have struggled to figure out. They know how to sell hardware. They've sold tons and tons of hardware, but they've struggled to kind of pull this together and monetize the digital part of these solutions as well as some others have done. And it's a tough space. So if you wrap this all together, you've got this innovation Venn that you're working, and you really got these 4 constraints that are, I think, today in the digital world you have to manage. You have to manage ownership is obsolete. You have to manage the experience economy and focus on the experience economy. Uncertainty is the basis of profit. Make sure the problem you're solving is a real and important one, and don't suffer the tyranny of or. It's and, not or. You have to solve the enterprise problem, but if you don't solve the users, if you don't make it easy on the users, you will not be able to deliver to the enterprise. And so this is kind of the how-to map that we see. And as I said, I think companies like Evoqua have demonstrated how they have done this well, and they've managed to hit that sweet spot in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. That was terrific. Hey, I'll just go right to, we got time for another question or so. And there's one that was posited that was, the question is your company, are you helping, your clients, in basically analyze this data that you're collecting or could be collecting, in a kind of a equipment leasing environment to make broader inferences about, how a company might be performing or other inferences about the economy?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, first of all, the answer is yes. One of the things that we're doing is we were told early on, by big equipment finance companies, that when COVID hit, cash became king. And when cash becomes king, people look for loans and leases to get access to equipment, right? And so what they call originations, which is new business, was actually going very, very robustly. But they had all of these leases that they've given, 3 and 5 year leases based on business propositions that were now unknown, or uncertain, I should say, not unknown, uncertain because of COVID. And so, the risk became, instead of, the equipment finance and most finance industries in general, they tend to look at historical data. And when you look at historical data, you're not able to be honest, you're not able to really take advantage of AI in the way that Scott talks about and that I believe in, which is prediction. A great book by Ajay Agarwal called Prediction Machines. And prediction requires real-time data. If you have real-time data and you have an understanding of the business and the equipment, most of this equipment is leased to generate revenue. And therefore, as long as I know if it's being used, I can manage the risk of use. I can manage the risk of financial performance by understanding whether or not it's being used. And the other part of equipment finance, the other big metric is called a residual. Anybody who's leased a car knows the value of your car at the end of the lease, i.e., did you drive as many miles as you said? You know, it dictates how much money you're borrowing effectively. And a residual value is a function of use, and it's a function of abuse. And the IoT provides a lot of easy ways to monitor that. So the answer is yes. This is what we're doing. We're running prototypes right now that are integrating these two stacks. You know, the financial stack is primarily one of historical data. The operational stack, the IoT stack, is all one of real-time data. And of course, we store all the data on the operational side, and we create models from it. But what we really want to focus on, what everybody in IoT is focusing on, is prediction. And Scott mentioned that, right? They predict when they need to be out there so that they could plan ahead and work with their customers to be on site. Prediction is about real-time data.
Well, thank you very much. Well, that was a terrific webinar. I really appreciate the presentations were fantastic. And we are at the end of our time here. We were going to have a nice, interesting discussion about ownership of data, but that'll have to be deferred to some future date. So we weren't able to have Liz contribute this time around, but we will be having a separate webinar on ownership of data and data issues later. But Scott Branum and Scott Nelson and Manjeet, you guys did a terrific job, and thanks so much for joining us, and best wishes for all your future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.